Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia. Russia's defense ministry says accusations from the U.S. and U.K. that Russia recently tested anti-satellite weaponry in space are distorted. The ministry says tests carried out of the 15th of July did not create a threat for other spacecraft, adding that it had not violated international law. Moscow said earlier that it had been using new technology to perform checks on Russian space equipment. But the U.S. and U.K. said they were concerned about the satellite activity. It is the first time that the U.K. has made accusations about Russian test firing in space, and comes just days after an inquiry said the U.K. government badly underestimated the threat posed by Russia. In a tit-for-tat escalation between the Chinese and the United States, Beijing has ordered the closure of the U.S. consulate in the southern western city of Chengdu. China said the move was in response to the U.S. closing its consulate in Houston and accused staff in Chengdu of meddling in its internal affairs. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. decision was taken because China was stealing intellectual property. Tensions have been rising between the U.S. and China over several key issues. President Donald Trump's administration has clashed repeatedly with Beijing over trade and the coronavirus pandemic, as well as China's imposition of a controversial new security law in Hong Kong. On Friday, Washington urged China to cease the malign actions rather than engage in tit-for-tat retaliation. China's move came hours after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hardened his tone further in a speech at the library of the former President Richard Nixon, whose 1972 China visit heralded a period of improved relations. Mr. Pompeo says U.S. allies must use more creative and assertive ways to press the Chinese Communist Party to change its ways.
President Nixon once said, he feared he had created a Frankenstein by opening the world to the CCP. And here we are. We, the freedom-loving nations of the world, must induce China to change, just as President Nixon wanted. We must induce China to change in more creative and assertive ways because Beijing's actions threaten our people and our prosperity. Securing our freedoms from the Chinese Communist Party is the mission of our time. And America is perfectly positioned to lead it because our founding principles give us that opportunity.
International affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins us now from Washington, D.C. to discuss more on this. Hello, Calvin. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So the tit-for-tat moves come amid a dramatic escalation in tensions between the world's two biggest economies. I mean, on Tuesday, Washington gave Beijing 72 hours to close its mission in Houston, Texas, alleging the theft of intellectual property. And now the closure of the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. It's a huge blow for both countries. Can the U.S.-China relations survive this round of tensions?
Yes, I think in the long term, the U.S.-China relations can survive. It's just a little unclear what that survival will look like. Because let me express what I think. I know my frustration is, and I think a lot of Americans feel, that the actions that the Trump administration has taken are strong. And I think that address real problems, be it what's going on in Hong Kong, business and trade practices. There's not really a problem with the actions. It's if there's a strategy behind them, either Donald Trump doesn't have one or he hasn't shared it. And that's where a lot of the frustration is coming because, like you said, we want to know not only will they survive, but what will China-U.S. relations even look like once these things have calmed down.
Right, and the ties have deteriorated over a number of issues, ranging from the coronavirus pandemic to Beijing's trade and business practices, and now most recently, the new security law in Hong Kong, which has drawn criticism not just from the U.S., but several other countries. So do you see China changing its policies in Hong Kong as a result?
I think it's possible for two reasons. One, obviously the pandemic is the focus of the U.S. and the world's attention. And you see that progress that had been made in Hong Kong was because there was international attention to it. So that's one factor. But in the short term, and I mean from now to the end of the year, it's really hard to see that any substantive changes will happen because of our election. And this isn't necessarily because of Donald Trump. I think this happens every U.S. presidential election, that China, which doesn't have a regular transfer of power, has the luxury of sitting back and waiting to see how things will turn out in November. And so I don't think they're going to make big moves one way or the other until they see where the cards lay for them after November 3rd.
Well, it's no news that tensions between the U.S. and China are longstanding, but this week, the war of words hit a new peak. So what's the U.S. strategy here? And, I mean, you did mention that this could be amplified to the looming elections in November.
Well, I think you hit on the key word that I wish we could hear from the Trump administration is what is the strategy? Because I'll tell you, one of the things that I notice is as President Trump tries to correct his course on dealing with the pandemic, he's still referring to it as the Chinese virus and blaming China, if not intentional, at least being negligent in causing this plague, as he calls it. And when he does that, I wonder, well, are the trade talks still happening? That can't make those easy. And then what is our goal when it comes to what happened with Houston? What are we going to do to retaliate, not just by closing the consulate, but about the businesses and potentially our election systems and the health systems that were potentially hacked and could be vulnerable? So those are answers that we all need to be able to really judge the leadership of Donald Trump or the lack thereof with China.
Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to the answers to some of those questions. Calvin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
The United Nations Human Rights Office says U.S. police and security forces must not use disproportionate force against protesters and journalists in U.S. cities, including Portland, or detain them unlawfully. The UN agency says law enforcement officers and federal forces must be clearly identifiable so that they can be held to account for any incidents of abuse. U.S. cities, including Portland, have been rocked by protests against racial injustice sparked by the death of George Floyd in police custody in Minneapolis on May 25th.
It is very important that people are able to protest peacefully, that people aren't subject to unnecessary, disproportionate or discriminatory use of force. It is incredibly important that law enforcement personnel abide by various principles. We refer often to the basic principles on the use of force by law enforcement, the code of conduct. We have our human rights concerns regarding how protests are policed generally. I think that is really very much more of a political question, precisely given the nature of the US form of government, which is at federal, state, and local level. But I think what we would say, and we would say with regard to other protests, is that it's really important that the authorities should ensure that the people deployed are not threatening use of force to deter peaceful protesters. It is very important when there is an incident that then it can be traced back to who is responsible. When people who are taking on a policing role are not identifiable, that can really heighten the risk of arbitrary detention. So it's really to underscore the accountability of the forces that are being deployed, that it is really important that they are clearly identifiable.
Muslim prayers have been held in the iconic Hagia Sophia for the first time in 86 years after the reconversion of the Istanbul landmark to a mosque earlier this month. The Friday prayers took place 2 weeks after Turkish President Erdogan controversially declared the nearly 1,500-year-old monument open to Muslim worship after a top court ruled the building's conversion to a museum by modern Turkey's founding statesmen in the mid-1930s was illegal. Erdogan, accompanied by cabinet minister and other top officials, joined hundreds of worshippers inside the Hagia Sophia as large crowds gathered outside. We'll now be joined by VOA's correspondent, Heather Murdoch. Heather, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So tell us, what was it like today at the Hagia Sophia as the first Muslim prayers in 86 years there took place?
Well, there were huge crowds, as you mentioned, and most of the people were outside in the gardens surrounding the building there to pray, and they were excited. I mean, this is something that a lot of people in Turkey support. As you know, that Turkey is almost entirely Muslim, so there is some popular support for this. The service itself focused on celebrating the reversal of this building back into a mosque from a museum. Before then, it was a mosque, and before then, it was a church. It also talked about this moment historically, and the preachers viewed it as a symbol of overcoming oppression against Islam.
Well, the decision to turn Hagia Sophia back into a mosque was criticized by religious and political leaders worldwide. But President Erdogan responded quickly to the ruling, so now it's in full force. What reaction is this getting in Turkey?
Yes, you're right. Erdogan did respond very swiftly and definitively to the criticism from around the world, saying this is a sovereign Turkish issue, basically no one else's business. Inside Turkey, there has, as I mentioned, been a lot of support. There has been some criticism, not particularly vocal criticism, as one of the main critiques of this controversy is that it is distracting from the real problems Turkey is facing, which is, like many countries around the world, economic crisis from the coronavirus pandemic. Other people have said that, besides celebrating it, they have also said that it shows a part of a pattern that's been going on for years of Turkey, like also other countries, becoming more nationalistic and less international. And this is just one more step, Turkey showing that it's going to be nationalistic and not necessarily do what its critics outside of the country will say.
Well, the 1,500-year-old UNESCO World Heritage Site became a museum in 1934, and it has been a huge tourist attraction since. So what does this ruling mean for the Hagia Sophia moving forward?
It's hard to say exactly what might happen because it just started today, but the government has assured people that the Christian treasures and artifacts and art inside the building will remain, and it will just be covered possibly electronically during Muslim prayers. They say that the building will also remain open for tourists, obviously not during the prayer times, but in general. And this is easily to believe because just across the garden is the Blue Mosque, another great historic Turkish building that is an active mosque, and it is open to tourists. So moving forward, we will still see tourism there, but it's just different symbolically, as opposed to a symbol of the international nature of this city and the diversity of this country. It is more of a symbol of the love of Islam here.
Well, Heather, thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you.
India has reported more than 49,000 fresh cases of the coronavirus, with 740 new deaths, marking the country's biggest daily surge in infections. Meanwhile, as global coronavirus cases climb just over 15,500,000 and the death toll reaches 634,405, countries such as the Czech Republic join the likes of Germany, Spain, and Italy to begin mandating face masks. Here's more on our COVID-19 Global Update.
India has recorded its highest daily number of cases with 49,310 new infections. This brings the country's total number of cases to 1.2 million. India is the world's third worst affected country and is currently experiencing a rise in cases after relaxing some lockdown rules. South Africa is closing its public schools for a month in a bid to curb the virus there.
The next few weeks will put our resources and resolve to the test as never before. And I call on all South Africans to remain strong.
Welcome to our COVID-19 press briefing today.
The number of confirmed cases in the country have surpassed 400,000. More than 6,000 people have died. About 30 million people will be offered the flu vaccine this winter to reduce the burden on health services coping with a potential second wave of COVID-19. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson calls it the biggest ever flu immunization program. Meanwhile, new rules requiring face coverings to be worn in shops in England have come into force to help reduce the risk of a new pickup in the spread of the coronavirus. The Czech Republic is following suit and is making the wearing of face coverings at indoor events mandatory from midnight. The country currently has more than 5,000 people infected with the virus, the highest number since the start of the pandemic. In other countries in Europe, such as Germany, Spain, Italy and Greece, it is already compulsory to wear face coverings inside shops. And finally, in Germany, people who return from high-risk countries will now be required to take a coronavirus test at the airport. Anyone who can't show a negative result, including people who refuse the test, will have to go into quarantine for 14 days.
Boris Johnson has admitted the government did not understand coronavirus during the first few weeks and months of the UK outbreak. Earlier today, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he thought the country would be through the coronavirus crisis by mid-2021, but feared there may be a second spike that could overwhelm the health service. He describes the COVID-19 pandemic as a very nasty thing for the world to contend with, and that tough times lie ahead in dealing with the virus and its economic fallout.
It's been a very, very nasty thing for the human race. And I think that by the middle of next year, we will be well on the way past it. But I must be clear with people. I do still think that we have tough times ahead in keeping this virus under control, and we have tough times ahead in coming through economically. We want everybody to get a flu jab in the run-up to this winter, and that's why we're rolling out the biggest ever program of flu immunization, flu inoculation. The reason for doing this is to protect the NHS in the winter months, because obviously we've still got COVID, we've still got the threat of a second spike of COVID, and it's vital, therefore, to keep that pressure off the NHS by everybody getting a flu jab, and I really hope everybody will.
Hospitals in Kenya are gearing up for a surge in new infections. At the Machakos COVID-19 field hospital, about an hour's drive from the Kenyan capital, workers struggle to put a giant metal tent frame in place to serve as a new ward. Machakos County, which has 92 active cases of the virus, has already met the required minimum of 300 beds per county for COVID-19 patients set by the national government. But as national figures surge, Machakos is preparing for more infections. Positive cases in Kenya have nearly doubled in the last 2 weeks to 15,601, mirroring a continental surge. Africa topped 750,000 cases on Wednesday.
Temporarily, and it's the best, I think it's the best decision because it's an open air space and it's a big space where you can accommodate up to around 400 people. At the moment we have 36 patients, and so far we've discharged 18.
As the numbers increase, we'll also see on how to improve more, even for the other facilities. We have other facilities which have the bed capacity, but then the equipment need to be maybe increased in terms of numbers. We have 13 beds in the ICU. We have another extra 10 in our transitional ward within this facility. And then we have 240 beds in the stadium. So the 240 bed capacity, at least that one would hold for those patients who are mildly symptomatic and those who are a bit stable with COVID-19.
U.S. President Donald Trump has canceled the pre-election Republican Party convention in Florida, blaming the coronavirus flare-up. It comes as the number of cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. passed 4 million. Part of the convention will go ahead in North Carolina, where Mr. Trump will be formally nominated as a Republican presidential candidate. The event, shortened to a half day, will be held on the 24th of August in the city of Charlotte, the original venue for the convention.
So I told my team it's time to cancel the Jacksonville, Florida component of the GOP convention. Will be starting in North Carolina for the Monday, as has always been planned. We were never taking that off. That's remaining as it is. The delegates are going to get together. That's where they do their nomination. So the delegates are going to North Carolina, and they'll be doing the nomination. And we're going to do some other things with tele-rallies and online the week that we're discussing, which will be really good. I think we're going to do it well. And I'll still do a convention speech in a different form, but we won't do a big, crowded convention per se. It's just not the right time for that. I've spoken to Governor DeSantis and informed other political leaders. I want to thank the Jacksonville community and its great mayor. He's a great guy, really great guy. They wanted it so badly. And all of the other political representatives in Jacksonville and in Florida.
Germany's defense minister has praised an army program that is training service dogs to identify the coronavirus in people's saliva, a feat she is saying will still require many months of work moving forward. You're probably wondering, how can the dogs smell the coronavirus? Well, service dogs cannot actually identify the virus itself, but they can sniff out biochemical changes and body fluids caused by the virus. The dogs, referred to as comrades by the Army, need less than 100 microliters of saliva to produce results. A variety of breeds are working with the dedicated dog trainers at the Hanover University of Veterinary Medicine on a rewards-based system. The dogs are given treats if they identify saliva affected by the virus and no treats for sniffing out healthy saliva. Elsewhere, a French veterinary team is training dogs to sniff out COVID-19 sufferers from the smell of their sweats. Well, thank you so much for joining us for The World Today. Have a great weekend and stay safe. I'm Akaite Afia.